Friends, the Hindus have once again crossed every boundary in spreading extremism and inciting hatred. In India, the very moment the crescent of Ramadan appeared in the sky, they deliberately began to engage in dancing and singing right in front of the mosque. This act took place in a region of India that holds deep significance for both Muslims and Hindus alike. In that area, on one side stood an ancient mosque cherished by the local Muslim community, while on the other side a temple had been established, a sacred space for the Hindus. It was precisely the obstinate opposition of those Hindus toward the Muslims that set events in motion. When the crescent of Ramadan was sighted in the heavens and the mosque resounded with the announcement that the Ramadan crescent had been seen, a series of provocative actions began. An official announcement declared that various forms of worship and additional prayers for Ramadan were to be performed within the mosque. As soon as the blessed crescent was observed, people recited their supplications and hastened toward the mosque, eager to offer even their most humble and fragmented acts of worship before God. At the same time, at a short distance away, the temple was being elaborately adorned. What was particularly astonishing was that during those days there was neither any festival nor any scheduled religious observance among the Hindus. Yet, notwithstanding the absence of any such occasion, they resolved to decorate the temple. In addition, they proclaimed that for the next 10 days, a grand ceremony of worship would be held there. The entire pathway leading to the temple was meticulously decorated in accordance with Hindu customs. Even the route normally taken by the devout Muslims to approach the mosque was transformed, effectively being sealed off for the Muslim worshippers. Despite these measures, when the Muslims began to arrive at the mosque to perform their prayers without any interruption or interference in their sacred observance, a handful of extremist Hindus, witnessing what they considered a defilement of the prayer, must surely have ignited in you a sense of righteous anger and awakened your inner resolve. Yet, dear friends, behold how Allah Almighty prepared a lesson for these wrongdoers. Before I provide you with the full account of this incident, please note that if you are visiting this channel for the first time, do subscribe and click the bell notification so that you may remain informed about every subsequent update. This entire episode, as it turns out, occurred over the course of 3 separate Ramadans. Each time the call to prayer, the adhan, was sounded at the mosque, the Hindus would intentionally raise the volume of their devotional songs and create constant uproar. It seems that by generating persistent noise and commotion, they intended to distract the Muslims from their worship. Not only that, but on the very first day of Ramadan, when the adhan for the ASR prayer was sounded and people abandoned their daily labors to head to the mosque, a Hindu priest deliberately took to the microphone to hurl biting taunts at the Muslims. In doing so, he exalted his own religion in an exaggerated manner while simultaneously targeting Islam with sharp criticisms. In veiled language, his intent was unmistakably to wound the feelings of the Muslim community. And when no one offered any immediate protest to counter his provocation, his anger only grew more intense. For the past 2 years, such minor propaganda had been deliberately circulated with the aim of forcing the local Muslim population to abandon their homes and thereby ensuring that only Hindus would govern the area. Prior to these incidents, it was already known that money had mysteriously gone missing from the donation boxes situated outside the mosque, an act that everyone recognized as the handiwork of the Hindus. Yet, in order to prevent the unnecessary spread of extremist fervor, the Imam of the mosque chose to leave the matter in the hands of divine justice, trusting that Allah would set things right. On one particular day, as some Muslims and the mosque's Imam were on their way to the mosque, extremist Hindus along the route began shouting slogans invoking the name of God. One Hindu declared boldly that our God is the master of the entire universe. While all other religions are false and imaginary, no real deity exists. Incensed by this blasphemous remark, the Imam immediately recited the Kalma and retorted, "Those who, with their own hands, fashion stone idols can never possibly know what true God is. If your God is indeed so mighty, then let him speak for himself and declare that he is the sovereign of the entire cosmos. And what of the God who cannot even drive away the flies clinging to one's face, while you engage in bizarre rituals and dance before your idols in a futile bid to please him? What evidence can you offer to prove to the world that he is truly the master of the universe?" In his measured response, the Imam asserted that the true religion is one which teaches peace, instills moral values, and upholds cultural decency. qualities that his opponent's religion, which had reduced its followers to a state akin to animals, clearly lacked. With those words, he advanced further, leaving no doubt about his steadfast determination. In that very moment, all the Hindus who had been causing a ruckus by beating drums and clashing cymbals appeared as though they had been struck down by a venomous bite, a punishment as sudden and potent as the sting of a serpent. On that same day, as the call to prayer echoed from the mosque, an eerie silence descended upon the Hindu temple. It was as if everyone present in the temple were compelled into a state of deep contemplation. Yet the temple priest, who had long been adept at fanning the flames of anti-Muslim sentiment, would not allow his congregation even a moment to reflect. Instead of offering his people a lesson in humanity, he seized the opportunity to further inflame their sentiments against the Muslims, declaring that the recent events constituted an insult to their sacred worship and to their God, and that vengeance would soon be exacted in his name. No one could have foreseen what happened next. That very night during the performance of the Isha prayer, the same Hindu, having wrapped a handkerchief around his face to hide his identity, entered the mosque and began to launch a brutal attack on the worshippers. With vicious blows delivered by a stick, he struck many of the faithful on the head, leaving a number of them injured and some even rendered unconscious. As he continued to shout derisive and hateful words against Islam, the congregation was set ablaze with indignation. The injured were swiftly rushed to the hospital for urgent treatment. When the incident was reported at the local police station, the officers, who were themselves Hindus, demanded identification of the culprits. They insisted, "Identify these people for us. Tell us their names so that we can apprehend them," noting that the attackers had concealed their faces. Rather than registering a formal report, however, these police officers chose instead to expel the Muslims from the scene. Undoubtedly, this inaction stands as testament to the silent yet certain justice of Allah. The divine punishment that Allah decreed upon those Hindus who had desecrated the mosque and insulted the worshippers soon became evident before everyone's eyes. The following day, that very same Hindu was seen either engaged in a grand ceremony at his temple or celebrating with unbridled joy over the bold step they had taken against the Muslims the previous night. The fire that had been kindled in large trays, with lamps lit as part of strange and elaborate rituals, continued to blaze fiercely. Then, in an astonishing turn of events, cries, described in the narration as those of the Jews, were heard even within the confines of the mosque. At that moment, the mosque's imam, who had been imparting lessons from the Holy Quran to a group of children, suddenly witnessed black smoke rising from the sky as if it were speaking with a voice of its own. Overcome with fear, he cried out, "Allahu Akbar," and hurriedly led everyone out of the mosque. Soon a gathering formed outside, and all the people began to flee toward the temple. Upon closer inspection, it was discovered that the temple had been engulfed in flames. The building was completely consumed by the fire, and no one could fathom how the fire had ignited so suddenly. In a dramatic and horrifying moment, every Hindu present was overtaken by the flames. It is reported that nearly 50 Hindus were burned to death, while many others sustained injuries and were taken to the hospital for treatment. The temple priest, the very man who had ceaselessly spread hate and incited enmity against the Muslims, was himself reduced to ashes. In a rare moment of reluctant admission, he even acknowledged that the calamity that befell him was a direct consequence of his own actions in desecrating the mosque and attacking the worshippers. Yet even as these events unfolded, further allegations began to circulate. This fire, which had descended as a natural form of divine retribution, was being falsely attributed by some to the Muslims. Moreover, the police, who had earlier refused to register a complaint, were now carrying out an investigation that favored the Hindus. They declared that if there were even the slightest suspicion cast upon the Muslims, the mosque should be sealed off immediately. As these events unfolded, one cannot help but observe a meticulously orchestrated attempt by certain groups to undermine the sanctity of religious practice and disturb communal harmony. Every action, every word uttered, and every decorative flourish appears to have been planned with the singular aim of sowing discord and provoking a violent response. The deliberate contrast between the solemnity of the mosque and the theatrical display at the temple underscores the intensity of the conflict. The intentions behind these provocative acts were not only to disrupt the spiritual atmosphere of the holy month of Ramadan, but also to assert a dominance that transcended mere religious expression. In the unfolding drama, each detail, from the festive yet provocative decoration of the temple and the deliberate obstruction of the mosque's access route to the mysterious disappearance of funds from the donation boxes, points to a calculated effort to destabilize the peaceful coexistence of the two communities. The inflammatory rhetoric used by certain religious leaders served only to further inflame tensions. The mosque's imam, representing the dignified and sincere aspirations of his community, stood firm in the face of these provocations. His resolute response, calling for peace and moral integrity, formed a stark counterpoint to the aggressive and incendiary actions of his adversaries. The scene within the mosque, where the resounding call to prayer was met by an eerie silence at the temple, vividly illustrates the immediate impact of these events on both communities. The subsequent violence during the Isha prayer, the brutal attack on the worshippers, and the biased inaction of the local police only deepened the crisis. Then came the inexplicable outbreak of fire in the temple, which not only claimed the lives of nearly 50 individuals, but also marked a dramatic turn in this tragic saga. In an almost surreal twist, the very force of nature appeared to exact divine punishment upon those who had deliberately sown hatred. Throughout this chronicle, we witness a bitter struggle marked by deliberate provocation and a chain of retaliatory actions. The extremist tactics, ranging from the disruptive celebrations during the sacred time of Ramadan to the callous physical assault in the mosque, are laid out in vivid detail. Every element of the narrative, whether it is the loud, discordant music that accompanied the Adhan or the aggressive denunciations over the public address system, reinforces the reality of a conflict driven by deep-seated enmity. At its core, the account stands as a stark reminder of the destructive potential of religious intolerance when it is manipulated by those with extremist agendas. Moreover, the narrative serves to highlight how the failure of impartial law enforcement can exacerbate communal tensions. When the police, instead of upholding justice, sided with one community by dismissing the grievances of the other, it only added fuel to an already volatile situation. The tragic outcome, a temple consumed by flames and lives lost in the ensuing chaos, underscores the perilous consequences of allowing hatred to go unchecked. The detailed sequence of events, spanning multiple instances over 3 Ramadans, thus becomes not only an account of a single incident, but also a broader commentary on the perils of communal discord. Every provocative gesture, every malicious word, and every act of violence is interwoven into a narrative that reflects a deliberate attempt to disrupt the harmony between communities. In the end, the divine retribution that manifested in the form of an all-consuming fire serves as a sobering reminder that such hatred can only lead to self-destruction. This translated narrative, in its entirety, encapsulates a deeply disturbing episode of communal tension and violence. It recounts how extremist elements deliberately orchestrated events designed to insult and destabilize the sacred practices of the Muslim community. From the initial act of dancing and singing in front of the mosque at the sighting of the Ramadan crescent, through the provocative declarations and disruptive rituals at the temple, to the brutal attack during prayer and the subsequent catastrophic blaze that engulfed the temple, every detail is presented with unflinching clarity. In reflecting on this account, one is reminded of the immense responsibility that lies with religious and community leaders alike. The deliberate manipulation of faith to serve divisive ends not only undermines the sanctity of religious practice, but also endangers the very fabric of communal coexistence. The events described here stand as a testament to the destructive power of hate when it is allowed to flourish unchecked, a power that ultimately exacts a heavy price from all involved.